Hey, it's Brett, and this is Brett and Some Books. Today we are continuing the plot to seize the White House by Jules Archer. This is Chapter 6 of Part 3. Butler's speeches at bonus rallies and over the air helped put pressure on Congress to pass the Patman bonus bill. And as it went to the White House, Butler urged the president to sign it into law, pointing out that it was one way the nation could make amends to the veterans for their exploitation by big business in America's wars of the 20th century. In a radio broadcast on May 9th, he urged his listeners to deluge Roosevelt with 1,000,000 wires and send letters supporting the bill. But the president vetoed it. On May 21st, Butler conferred with Senator Elmer Thomas of Oklahoma in Washington on tactics to get Congress to override the veto. Afterward, he declared his hope of organizing a large-scale political movement of veterans to press for the bonus. "My idea," he told the press, "would be a mammoth organization like the Grand Army of the Republic, which would bring political pressure to bear to take care of the soldiers." Now, he criticized not only the American Legion, but also the VFW for avoiding the political arena. "They're no good. They've got provisions in their bylaws which say they can't engage in political action. The politicians put them to sleep. If the soldiers don't get theirs now, they'll organize and get it. There'd be about 5 million of them." He was asked who would head the new organization. I don't know who we'd get to lead it," he replied. He was instantly besieged with requests from various veterans groups that he take them over as the nucleus for his battle for the bonus and veterans pensions. Morris A. Beale, publisher of Plain Talk magazine, wrote Butler on May 24th that he had already begun such an organization, calling it the Iron Veterans. He urged Butler to assume its leadership. "You may be interested to know that Bill Doyle tried to finance this organization for us," Beale wrote, "but acted so suspiciously at Miami that I thought he was trying to take it over for the royal family of the American Legion and declined to do business with him." This was the same Doyle who had accompanied McGuire in the plotter's first contact with Butler. Beale added, "A few weeks later, I discovered to my horror that he was trying to take it over for the House of Morgan." But Butler, made worry by the fascist plan for a veteran superorganization, began to have second thoughts about the wisdom of any attempt to organize a national veterans group for political purposes. "To attempt a national association in the beginning," he wrote to the organizer of the American Warriors in Iowa, "would lead to great financial expense and exploitation of the veterans by chiseling professionals. While it might be possible to find those who would contribute the necessary funds, it would put the veterans under obligation to the contributors." His fight for the bonus bill and his bare-knuckled attacks against the establishment led to cancellation of his radio broadcast as of July 3rd. A month earlier, when Van Zandt urged him to come to Montana to speak for the soldiers' bonus at a VFW rally there, Butler declined. "Such a trip would be a very heavy drain on my pocketbook," he explained, "and as long as I am being put off the air—" "Oh, Butler. Oh, Such a trip would be a very heavy drain on my pocketbook," he explained, "and as long as I am being put off the air for being too noisy in my criticism of the organization and for taking the part of the soldiers, I shall more or less have to conserve my resources." But he was determined to get to the truth as he saw it out to the American people, and undertook a new lecture tour that would cover the country. Roosevelt had not been able to get the press to carry his message to the people, so he had turned to national radio. Butler had not been able to get national radio to carry his message, so he turned to town hall meetings all over America. On June 12th, the American Legion of ex-servicemen asked him to speak at a rally in favor of the bonus with American Labor Party Congressman Vito Marcantonio. Butler agreed, with the understanding that he spoke as an individual only, not as a representative of any group. The League adjutant quickly agreed, adding, "Millions of rank-and-file veterans have always looked to you as a champion of their cause in fighting for their rights and to receive justice from the government." Meanwhile, a vigorous debate was taking place in Congress, sparked by the Nye Committee revelations and the weakness of the League of Nations over the Ludlow resolution calling for a national referendum before war could be declared. The resolution failed, but on August 31st, Congress passed the first Neutrality Act. It forbade transportation of munitions to any belligerents after the President had declared a state of war to exist between them and authorized the President to prohibit travel by American citizens on the ships of the belligerents. Butler regretted the failure of the Ludlow resolution to pass because he saw it as a way to prevent powerful men from making decisions that could drag the country to war. He praised Congress for passing the Neutrality Act, however, believing that it could help take the profits out of war for the American munitions makers, but also make it difficult for them to embroil the United States in a foreign war by stirring passions over Americans lost at sea in naval attacks. When a book by Senator Huey Long appeared, hopefully called My First Days in the White House, it listed as members of Long's mythical cabinet Franklin D. Roosevelt and Herbert Hoover, with Smedley Butler as Secretary of War. On September 15th, a week after Long was assassinated, Butler was interviewed in Atlanta. He was asked how he felt about his inclusion in the late senator's proposed cabinet. Characterizing it as the greatest compliment ever paid to me, Butler smiled. "I certainly felt in good company." Asked about his own political ambitions, Butler shrugged. "I'm just a gentleman farmer now." Reporters then asked him to comment on the government's transfer of veterans who had been lobbying for the bonus from Washington to Florida, where some had been killed in a violent hurricane. "What I'm interested in," Butler replied, "is who approved the order to send them down there. They were in Washington, lobbying or pleading under their constitutional rights, when they were sent down to the sand pits. Are there other lobbyists in Washington? There are other lobbyists in Washington. Why not deport them, too?" On October 5th, when Mussolini invaded Ethiopia, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee invoked an arms embargo against both countries under the Neutrality Act. Although Butler sympathized with Ethiopia, he approved of Congress's determination to keep clear of involvement in any foreign war. On Armistice Day, he spoke to a crowd of 10,000 in Philadelphia at a peace rally held by the Armistice Day Celebration Committee and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Deglamorizing the first war he had fought in, the Spanish-American War, he shouted, "That war was caused by the newspaper propaganda of William Randolph Hearst, and he's been trying to get us into another war ever since. Don't let the man you send to Washington get you into another war. That is surely coming along." Urging an even stronger neutrality law to keep America at peace, he declared, "My interest in peace is personal. I have 3 grown sons, and I'll be damned if anyone's going to shoot them. We pay the farmers in the West not to grow corn. We pay other farmers not to raise hogs, not to grow cotton. Let us pay the munitions makers not to make munitions. We must work against war now. Wait until the war drums beat and you'll go half crazy. You'll march up Broad Street and raise Liberty loans to help Europe pay off its debts to the House of Morgan. The present man in the White House, Mr. Roosevelt, says he will do his utmost to keep us out of war. That language isn't strong enough for us. We want him to say we won't have war." He told the YMCA audience that Mussolini was invading Ethiopia to get oil because the nation was bankrupt. "The only way out for Mussolini is to declare war on somebody. That's the regular way of dealing with such situations. If this country ever gets busted, you can look for a war in about 6 months. Before he started it, Mussolini called a conference with England and France, and he thought he had everybody's permission to go ahead. Diplomacy is reeking with rotten politics. None of the representatives of any of the nations is sincere. I wouldn't trust any of them anywhere. Interviewed on an NBC radio program, he reported, "After the war, I began visiting the veterans' hospitals, where I saw the ghastly human wreckage of that war. What right have we to send men away from their homes to be shot? I'd limit the plebiscite to those who are actually going to do the fighting and dying, to the men of military age. Do you want your son to go? Do you want your son to leave his home and lie down on the ground somewhere on the other side of the world with a bullet in him, cut down like a stalk of wheat? Oh no, not your son. I've got 3 sons, and I know. I just came back from a 9,000-mile trip around the country, and I know this too. None of the American men I spoke to want to nominate their sons for the unknown soldier of the future." Seeing the war clouds gathering over Europe, he grew worried that Americans would once again be fed slogans and half-truths to distort their judgment, and fall victims to professional propagandists for those who would urge war in support of one favored country or another. He sensed the president's growing internationalism and joined other liberal pacifists in demanding that Roosevelt stick to implementing the New Deal and steer clear of any foreign adventures. Addressing the Third U.S. Congress against war and fascism in Cleveland on January 3, 1936, he urged strict neutrality. "Every indication points to a second world war. The nations of Europe and Asia are spending billions of dollars each year in military preparations. These nations are bound to go to war because the men in charge of the governments of some of them have worked their people into a fanatical frame of mind. Now that their people are getting out of control, these so-called leaders must attack some foreign objective if they are to remain in control. With many of them, it is a question of a foreign war or being overthrown. None of these dictators is willing to cut his own throat, hence this war. If we pass a single tiny thread of help to these leaders gone insane, these same leaders will pull a bigger line after the little one until the rope is so big they can drag us in with it. When you take sides, you must eventually wind up by taking part. See that our Congress writes into law a command that no American soldier, sailor, or Marine be used for any purpose except to protect the coastline of the United States and protect his home. And I mean his home. Not an oil well in Iraq, a British investment in China, a sugar plantation in Cuba, a silver mine in Mexico, a glass factory in Japan, an American-owned share of stock in European factory. In short, not an American investment anywhere except at home. Let Congress say to all foreign investors, come on home or let your money stay out of the country. We will not defend it." As the nation grew increasingly polarized between the anti-fascist interventionist and anti-war isolationist, Butler's uncompromising stand against war was sometimes confused with the right-wing propaganda of pro-fascists who wanted no American help given to the victims of Mussolini and Hitler. In April 1936, the Tacoma News-Tribune published an editorial in his anti-war speeches, intimating that he was credited with fascist leanings. The Olympia, Washington Post of the United Spanish War Veterans immediately passed a resolution protesting this libel. Demanding a retraction, they pointed out, less than 3 years ago he stifled an incipient fascist rebellion in the eastern United States, an accomplishment due solely to his own initiative prompt thereby demonstrating once more his stalwart Americanism. While Butler had become an isolationist out of disillusionment with the motives of those who had engineered armed U.S. intervention in other countries, he hated fascism as fervently as he hated war. He warned angrily that the fascist fifth column in America was so active that 1 in every 500 Americans had become, at heart, a traitor to democracy. One of his long-fought crusades ended in triumph in January 1936, when Congress, under heavy pressure from the nation's veterans, aroused by Butler, Senators Patman and Thomas, and the VFW bonus rallies, finally passed the Patman bonus bill over Roosevelt's veto. Many veterans groups now urged him to throw his hat into the presidential race of 1936. A realist, he declined, explaining, "I am too ignorant to be President of the United States and have not a definite plan for curing our present ills. I am doing the best I can to educate myself, but I feel that no man should invite others to follow him unless he has a definite objective and has the course marked out day by day. I, of course, learned the above from my military life." He devoted all his energies to keeping America out of the war he saw coming, preoccupied with writing and speaking against it, as well as reading to learn more about it. He had no time for the theater, radio, or tennis, which he loved and played brilliantly. At the dinner table, at home, and elsewhere, guests listened to him, spellbound in complete silence. He was kept talking so much that he frequently left the table without having had more than a mouthful of food. A thoroughgoing extrovert, he was not ostensibly an egotist. It simply came naturally to him as a Marine general to be in command of any situation. His children could not recall any gathering which their father did not hold forth, less because he wanted or needed to, than because he was urged on by a barrage of interested questions. People were fascinated by his views and experiences. He was not, however, among the honored guests in the American Liberty League on January 6, 1936, organized a banquet for 2,000 of its members at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington. The principal speaker was Al Smith.